The only way to stop living paycheck to paycheck is to reduce expenses, increase savings, and increase your income. However, it can be hard to know where to start and where to end when you're one emergency away from chaos. And so in this video, we will look at how anyone can stop living paycheck to paycheck, step by step. All right, let's start with the most boring step, budgeting. I know the word alone can make people tune out. It sounds restrictive, overwhelming, or like something you've already failed at before. But when you're living paycheck to paycheck, budgeting isn't about perfection or discipline. It's about clarity. Most people don't actually know where their money goes each month. They just know that it disappears. And when you don't know the pattern, you can't change the outcome. It's that simple. And so this step is simply about seeing the truth without any guilt or judgment. You write down how much money comes in each month. Then you list your fixed expenses like rent, utilities, insurance, minimum debt payments, transportation, and groceries. Just facts. No trying to impress yourself, no pretending things cost less than they do. This isn't about being good with money, it's about being honest with it. Then comes the part that actually helps, cutting and optimizing. Cutting means removing things that genuinely don't matter anymore. Subscriptions you forgot about, services you rarely use, small monthly charges that quietly drain your account. On the other hand, optimizing means keeping what you need but paying less for it. Cheaper phone plans, negotiating bills, buying groceries with a plan instead of impulse. This step won't change your life overnight, but it creates space. And when you're paycheck to paycheck, space is what allows everything else to work. So the good news is if you have subscriptions, memberships, insurance, a phone plan, or anything else that costs you money, it means you have savings potential. Car insurance can be improved every year, groceries can always be optimized, and Netflix can be paused temporarily. Now we need to talk about housing because this is where most budgets break. Housing is usually the biggest expense and it's also the hardest one to change emotionally. It's not just a number, it's comfort, privacy, routine, and to some degree, identity itself. But here's the hard truth. If your housing cost is too high for your income, no amount of budgeting will fully fix the problem. You can cut subscriptions, you can skip eating out, you can track every dollar. And you'll still feel stuck if rent or housing eats most of your paycheck. Remember, the goal is to stop living paycheck to paycheck here, not just making some savings. There are multiple potential options with this one depending on someone's situation. One option is to have a roommate or multiples to share bills with. That option can cut housing costs by half and more. Another option is to rent some of the available space and earn some extra income. Another potential move is to relocate, either downsizing or going to a cheaper area, or do both. Finally, going back to living with the parents is also an option, though it's often more emotional and affects the ego even more than the other options. But for many people, it's often the biggest way they can save money. All of these options don't have to be permanent, but they are possible. Think of housing as the foundation. If it's unstable, everything built on top of it feels shaky. Fixing this one thing can change your entire financial situation. The next step is to build an emergency fund, but differently than how it is often promoted. Emergency funds are talked about a lot, but rarely explained in a realistic way. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, hearing that you should save 3 to 6 months of expenses sounds impossible, and honestly, at this stage, it is indeed often quite unrealistic. So here we'll forget the big number completely. Instead, we'll focus on building consistency. The emergency fund can start with something small. Maybe it's $25 per paycheck. Maybe it's $10. Maybe it's even $5. The amount doesn't matter nearly as much as the habit. What you're really doing is building a buffer between you and chaos. Without an emergency fund, every small issue becomes a crisis. A car repair, a medical bill, or even a missed shift. And those crises usually lead to debt, which keeps the cycle going. A small emergency fund doesn't prevent emergencies. It prevents panic during them. A lot of people love to set them up automatically if they can. They treat it like a bill, then try not to touch it unless it's truly necessary. It doesn't make any of us feel rich, but it makes all of us feel less fragile, $1 at the time. Now, the next step is to target debt. Debt is one of the heaviest parts of living paycheck to paycheck. Not just financially, but mentally. It creates constant pressure even when nothing is actively going wrong. So the goal here isn't to rush or punish anyone, it's simply to move forward with intention. The goal here is to target debts efficiently and consistently. And so the first step is often to get in a situation where the total amount of debt is consistently diminishing. That means that if someone has 3 debts in total for, let's say, $10,000 today, That person wants that total amount to be diminishing consistently, either weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. And so the smart move to make is to choose a payoff strategy that you can stick with. Some people prefer paying off the smallest balances first because it creates quick wins and motivation. Others focus on the highest interest rates because it saves more money over time. Both approaches work. What doesn't work is being random. Throwing extra money at different debts with no clear plan just creates frustration. The most important thing to watch is whether your total debt balance is shrinking over time. Progress doesn't have to be fast, it just has to be real. As debt decreases, your monthly obligations get lighter, your paycheck stretches further, and slowly the pressure starts to ease. Now that useless expenses have been cut, necessary expenses optimized, housing taken care of if it needed, savings are slowly growing, and debt is being targeted, the next step is what changes life for good: starting a side income. And really a side income, not side hustle. This is where a lot of financial advice becomes unrealistic. Everyone talks about side hustles like they're the solution to everything, but many side hustles demand time, energy, and skills that people already stretched thin don't have. So instead of thinking side hustle, think side income. Side income doesn't have to be impressive. It doesn't have to scale. It doesn't have to turn into a business. It just needs to help. This could be extra hours at work, freelance work using a skill you already have, selling things you no longer need, helping someone locally for cash. The point isn't to grind nonstop. The point is to create a little more margin. Even a few $100s a month can make a massive difference when you're paycheck to paycheck. Not only can it speed up debt payoff and help building your emergency fund faster, it also reduces stress. And once you're stable, you can decide whether to keep going or stop. For example, someone with a car can start Uber and make around $20 an hour as an extra income for some time. It doesn't have to be permanent. It just needs to help in the process of fixing personal finances. The next step is to change your environment to change your mindset. This step is subtle but yet extremely powerful. Our environments have a huge influence about how we think about money, the people we spend time with, the conversations we hear, the content we consume every day. If you spend your entire day listening to content about how to fix car problems, you'll definitely become better than the average Joe at fixing car problems. It is the same with learning skills, investing, and leveling up financially. And so, if everyone around you treats being broke as normal, jokes about money stress, or spends impulsively, it becomes harder to think differently. That doesn't mean cutting people off, it means being intentional. So, spending more time with people who are calm about money, who plan ahead, or who don't panic over every expense can only be beneficial. On the other hand, listening to content that educates instead of shaming and explains instead of flexing is another strategy which you're currently doing. Mindsets don't change overnight, but repeated exposure to better ideas slowly reshapes how we think and act. And after having done all of the 6 steps mentioned before, here comes the last step. Use most of your time. This is the most underestimated part of all. And it's not about being productive every second. It's about being intentional with some of your time. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, survival mode takes over. Scrolling, distracting yourself, avoiding thinking about money. All of that makes sense when you're stressed. But progress usually comes from small pockets of focused time. 30 minutes learning something useful. An hour improving a skill. Time spent planning instead of worrying. You don't need to optimize your entire life. You just need to use some of your time on purpose. Time compounds quietly. Most people don't realize how powerful it is until they start directing it instead of losing it. This step doesn't feel dramatic, but over months and years, it changes everything. There's no magic path out of living paycheck to paycheck. No secret trick. No overnight fix. The answer is usually simple, but not easy. Increase income and cut expenses, but the key is doing it strategically in a way that fits real life. Small steps, consistent effort, less pressure, more clarity. If this video actually helped you and you want to see similar content, click on one of those showing on your screen right now. I'll see you there.